All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Switch Hours. We've got a lot happening this week with Smart Energy Conference going on. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to join. We've already got a few people coming on. We'll just wait for a few others to come on. But I hope everyone's having a great week. It's sunny and beautiful here on the Sunshine Coast. What's the weather like down at Smart Energy, Daniel?
It is indoors, so I'm not really too sure. No, I think it's sunny today.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful today. Sydney's having a great winter, if you like, or at least less rain than usual.
Yeah, Joey, you're outdoors. You're getting a bit of sun. So, what do you think solar's doing right now? The solar's pumping.
You and your luck. If you're over there with no clouds, good. If you're over there with the clouds, not so good.
Right. Very good. Awesome. We've got a couple more people joining. Welcome to Switch Hours as new people join. Lovely to have you here. Massimo, welcome. Peter, welcome. All right, let's get started. Today we have a really interesting conversation around operations and maintenance of solar and batteries at scale. We have a fabulous guest, Daniel Lazarus, who is the co-founder and head of partnerships at Industrias. So Daniel has experience in the battle scars to be well educated and informed to have this conversation with us. We have a special guest on the panel today as well, who I'm hoping will be a more regular participant, is Rohan Tronson. He's a sales engineer at SwitchDin, and he's one of the smart people in the room whenever I'm in the room with him. I have Joey Kassouf, head of product at SwitchDin, and myself. So very excited to be having this discussion today. So both Daniel and Joey are at the Smart Energy Conference right now. Curious, Daniel, have you been to any interesting talks, had any interesting conversations so far?
Yeah, so it's only the beginning of day one. The conference isn't as big as All Energy, which is down in Melbourne, but I did mention before there's some very interesting introductory speakers regarding the battery rebate and the results of the battery rebates, and obviously the popularity and the challenges around that. And then Twiggy Forrest just spoke before around Fortescue's plans to become net zero by 2030, which was actually really nice to hear. He was very candid, especially coming from a miner. He was very candid around the incentives that miners get in using diesel and how it's absolutely not just economically viable, but in their interests to move towards a greener future where renewables and a lot of the different things that he's doing can actually replace the millions and millions of litres of diesel that their machines use a year. So it was actually very interesting. So only the beginning, but so far not too bad.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Joey, have you had a chance to go and see any talks or talk to anyone yet?
No, I had a meeting with a customer and then a potential customer, and then got my badge and came out and.
All right. Came out to do this. That's awesome. Commitment. That's great. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for everyone joining. And Rohan's on the Sunshine Coast. What's happening on the Sunshine Coast today, Rohan?
It's a quiet one. Like I said, weather's beautiful. Nice place to be and nice environment. Birds are singing.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, let's talk about solar O&M at scale. I think one of the most interesting developments is that there is an aging fleet of solar, not so much with batteries, but certainly with solar. What's happening, Daniel, around this aging fleet of solar? What are we seeing? Are we seeing degradation in performance? Are we seeing failures? What are we seeing with the aging fleet in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, and so appreciate you guys and everyone who puts a bit of a spotlight to this area, especially in this industry, as I mentioned before, where so much focus and attention has been put towards the battery rebate, and all resources in the industry seem to be consumed by the construction of new solar and new battery, and maintenance really isn't talked about enough. And like I mentioned to you before, it's not exactly the sexiest subjects, but it's quite interesting when you start talking about it. People become really engaged and really start to understand and be quite enthused by a lot of the facts and figures and findings that we have found over time. And as you've correctly said, systems are starting to really age in Australia. We've got more than 4 million systems now, more systems per capita than any other country in the world. And many systems are not just 5, but 10, 15, even 20 years old in Australia. And so we've got a great data set to understand what happens to systems as they age over time via wear and tear, both from a performance perspective and from a safety perspective. And those systems can be in harsh weather environments, non-harsh weather environments, different types of technologies, different designs, different installers. And so it becomes very interesting to understand wear and tear as a result of installation issues, but also wear and tear as a result of the fact that they're outside 24 hours a day producing electricity in an area which often is not really seen or visible or visited by many people over time. And so we're seeing this exact thing, an enormous amount of wear and tear that's happening on systems, both at the residential level, the commercial and industrial level, and even at the very large scale utility level. Wear and tear is happening at an alarming rate. And what's happening is there's a huge amount of orphan systems, so systems where the installer might not be servicing them or the installer might not exist anymore. You've got system owners that don't know that their systems aren't performing as they should. They don't have the monitoring levels that they should, or the documentation, or even it might be performing now, but it's at the precipice of something quite significant happening from a safety perspective or from a performance perspective. So it is really alarming what we're seeing out there. In fact, overall, we're seeing more than 30% of systems substandard and sort of 1 to 3% of systems being unsafe. And so you might say 1 to 3% is not that high, but when you're talking about 4 million systems, it's pretty significant. And unsafe is arcing of electricity, or potential for fires on the roof. And you don't really need to go far to Google Australian solar fires on a roof or Australian solar system incidents or maintenance requirements, and you'll see very vividly that there is an enormous amount happening out there on many, many systems without the necessary care. And we can go through what that looks like, and whether it be through us or through anyone else, it's an enormous and emerging sector which is really not getting enough attention as it deserves. All the limelight is being put on construction, all the money and attention and stress being put onto consumption, but very little, I should say, not enough time and attention being put on ensuring those systems perform as they should.
Right, absolutely. Joey or Rohan, have you guys had conversations? Most of our conversations tend to be around new implementations, but I'm just curious if Joey or Rohan, you guys have had any conversations around older systems and how those older aging systems need to be integrated into expansions, anything like that in your world? Like that's
Yeah, well, I think we see it. Yeah, I mean, we see it with the systems that SwitchDin integrates with, and we see at the sort of C&I level various levels of engagement with their solar and DER systems. Some of which they're just expected to be working, and not a lot of attention spent either on the managing the physical asset or on the systems that are monitoring the telemetry and the energy management. And that can go on for years, and all of a sudden we get a phone call saying, what is this box? What is this system? What's it doing? Yeah, it's pretty common.
Right. The silent failure. You don't realise it's a failure until you see the bill, I guess. So actually, everyone talks about solar as low maintenance, though, right? So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's the challenge. Is older systems and even newer systems, the handovers, the documentation,
Right.
It's not as rigorous as what it should be. And so something as simple as a solar champion that might leave the business and doesn't really hand that over, that solar system now is essentially lost. because you can't see it. It's on the roof, and you can't really. It's not like an air conditioner where you can feel it. You can be, or a broken tap or a dirty floor. You can't see that, right? So if someone leaves, or the person who's championed that or has access to the monitoring leaves, that's a massive hole when it comes to understanding what that asset does for the business, let alone the maintenance that's required on that. And as what was correctly mentioned sort of before, you only know if something happens if there's a safety incident, or if an electricity bill rapidly spikes. And that's just completely reactive. And unfortunately, even when that happens, it often doesn't get noticed. And so the problem around here when it comes to maintenance that we see is not just making sure that your system is proactively maintained and monitored, and you've got a partner that is able to fix issues when they exist, but also that it's designed in a way that it can be maintained properly and easily, that you've got the documentation that can be that enables you to maintain that, you understand all the different system elements and segments on the system, but also that monitoring is being even set up, and you guys would know that. It's so easy for a system to go from being managed well to not managed well. And unless you've got the partners in place to connect the dots, it's very easy, and this is what's happened in most circumstances, that a system might be great, performing well, not performing well, and no one really knows what to do.
Right. And what sort of documentation or what sort of artifacts are needed to be left behind if someone leaves, right? The solar champion leaves. Is it a matter of it's a documentation that needs to be handed over and someone else is enabled, or is it goes beyond that?
So the ironic thing is that nothing that we'll talk about today is any different to how an HVAC asset is maintained, or even your car is maintained. So when you talk about solar, you talk about what we call as-built or system documentation. These are documents that should have been compiled by law from the installer and handed over to the asset owner. So that would be things like layouts, single level diagrams, a description of the products that have been installed, the serial numbers of the panels, login details to the monitoring portals that should have been set up. So all the things that you would expect to exist on a solar system is in one document and is put there. In most circumstances, it should be printed and put next to the switchboard or the PV the distribution board. But it should be a document that should be given and should be digitized, and that should be properly managed and stored at the company end. And as I said, in most circumstances, that just doesn't exist. So if someone engages us for their system that might be 5 years old, to say, okay, well, this hasn't been inspected before, can you please start managing it? Our first question is, okay, what's the size? What's the different elements of the system? All these different things that they wouldn't understand. So we need to go to site, gather the information. It becomes a lot harder process. And in more instances than not, we start the initial inspection and find a myriad of different issues. Some might have performance or safety impacts. Some might be issues that would have turned into performance and safety impacts in the next year. And so the amount of time and energy and money that we've saved just by inspecting the system is enormous. And so for us, it's an electricity producing asset. There's not a huge amount, people say there's not a huge amount of moving parts, but I would say it's producing electricity. That is the moving part. And so it's so important to make sure that these types of assets are managed well, because if it's not a factor of if, but it's a matter of when something will happen to that system.
And what are some of the typical issues, the myriad of issues? Sorry, Rohan. Do you want to ask the question, Rohan? I jumped over the top of you and I didn't.
Yeah. So once you have a system under management, what are the signals or the predictive behaviour that you're looking at that says it's crying out for help? That's predicting that it's moving from performant into underperforming or dangerous.
Yeah, great question. And so for us to answer that is to provide our recommendations to what needs to be done to properly maintain a system. And for us, it would definitely be a combination of active monitoring and proactive inspections. And whilst like a Venn diagram, there's overlap, remote monitoring is great for identifying issues remotely, but it does just that. It identifies an issue when it occurs. It cannot be, or it's severely limited with how proactive it can be with predicting issues, or identifying a myriad of items on site that it simply can't. Debris buildup, potential for water ingress, cracked panels, a lot of issues that that will eventuate with a safety or performance fault. It can't do that. And so a combination of those two things are so important. In fact, I would say if it was a mixture of the two, I would say go with the free inverter-based monitoring, do that yourself, and engage someone to proactively inspect your system at least on an annual basis. And even then it will determine whether it needs a clean and all sorts of stuff that it can determine from there. But some of the key indicators would be, let's say if you are remotely monitoring, it would be obviously faults that get identified, and making sure that you not just identify the fault, but you analyze the fault and you understand what the fault is, give it time to potentially resolve itself, and make sure that you know that it's a real fault, whether it be a communications issue or an inverter string that's gone down or whatever it might be. Or when it comes to proactively inspecting the system, some of the key items you're looking for, key safety elements and key performance elements, so water ingress potential, debris buildup, underperforming or strings that might be out, cracked isolators, or things that might, and a big thing when you're looking on the roof is items which could cause water ingress. Like that is really the biggest impact to a system, would be water ingress or faults on the inverter itself. And so those would be the key and the most common factors that we would be looking for. And it's so easy. You identify a fault, it can be fixed. But the implications of entire inverters blowing up from earth faults or isolators that burn out from water ingress, the implications are significant, or they can be significant. So the cost just outweighs the benefits that you get from any benefits, or I should say the cost savings that you get from not doing it. And those savings only compound year on year as the system wears and tears. So not only are existing issues going to be compounded, but you might fix an issue here. That certainly doesn't mean that it won't be an issue at the other end of the system next year. And so it really pays for itself to give. People ask me, well, what is the ROI of maintenance? And I say, well, what's the ROI of servicing your car every year? Can you tell me how many more kilometers your car's going to do if you service it every year? No, but you know that you need to do it because it absolutely will increase the longevity or the safety of your car. The only difference I say, or the biggest difference, is that that's legislated, and maintenance on solar is not really legislated and it's not really inspected. And so until that is done, it will continue to be an issue. And that's why these sorts of podcasts are so important, to get the message out.
Yeah.
What kind of services? We're all jumping in here.
Go, Joey.
I was going to say, what services in that space are you offering, and what is available? So the proactive offering, if something goes wrong, so there's a myriad of things that can go wrong in a system, and fixing them has a hugely different cost, even down to, the inverter, right? It's going to cost a bunch more to change a certain type of inverter on a roof of a building than a different type of inverter in a plant room down on the ground.
Yes.
Is your offering, are you providing a full kind of almost insurance offering to your customers to say the cost of repair, we wear the cost of repair, all the processes that go with that, doing claims and engaging contractors and all the things that you end up having to, facility managers, project management, all that sort of stuff that comes with it. Are you offering that as part of your offerings to customers, or have they still yet to feel the real pain? So people are, you can't take money out of people's hands until they've really felt the pain a lot of the time. Are you seeing that as a offering that people want?
So there's so many interesting points that you've mentioned in that one question. The first one, which I won't go into the rabbit hole, was around design, and how people often forget about maintenance when they're designing a system. Like what you said about an inverter on a roof or an inverter on the ground, it makes a profound impact with how easy it is. Last week we had to order a crane to take an inverter down to replace it. and then a crane to lift it back up again. So even that mere fact, or for example, ordering or making sure your panels aren't installed right next to fiberglass sheeting so that you can just get to them to fix them, or making sure that you have spare panels on site because panels become obsolete after 3 years and they can't be replaced. Like all these little things become so important when you design a system. But to answer your main question, yes, we try to be a bit of a pick and mix or an all you can eat. So you can engage us for everything, that being proactive inspections, module cleaning, active monitoring, remediations, or you could choose us just to do remedial works or just inspections or just whatever you need us to do. But yes, a big part of our value is managing all the different processes, which you might say, oh, well, you were here for 2 hours, but then you don't really understand all the work that goes into organizing warranty claims and creating cases and organizing with the manufacturer, the shipping of that good and shipping back the faulty parts, and doing all those little bits and pieces which are so important in the process, in the warranty process. And you talk about warranties. Products might be warranted, but the labor isn't. So you might get a replacement part, but that doesn't mean that the labor is warranted, which is not the case for other industries. So a lot of these processes are very industry specific. And so we've got customers who are like, well, why are we doing this? Or why are we paying for that? Or why does this exist? And they really need a partner, whether it be us or someone else, to help them navigate that process. Some people, you're right, think that they can either do it themselves or think that unfortunately they'll align to what the installer tells them, which is it doesn't need maintenance and there's no moving parts. And they'll do that until something goes wrong and they realize that that just wasn't the case. And they'll soon realize after, the system ages that it will pay to have proactive maintenance. I mean, it'll cost them far less to have them to do proactive maintenance, not just to alleviate issues, but to identify issues before they become larger and to address those. And so, yes, you're right. The easiest time to sell maintenance or to convince someone's maintenance is needed is after an incident has occurred. You obviously try not to do that, but unfortunately, it is the case in many instances where you need to wait for something to occur and for them to realize and experience that solar is a fallible asset and it needs to be maintained like everything else. But yes, to answer your question succinctly, we can do everything, something, but we do manage that process for our clients, which is really important for them.
I'm assuming
ROI.
Pardon?
I'll go for a roll.
Is there a size of system that the sort of ROI for maintenance doesn't pan out? Like, do you look to a particular size of system where this sort of service actually pays to have?
So I mentioned this before, there's 3 things that are given in life: death, taxes, and solar maintenance. And that would exist for every system. Now, the frequency and the scope, which relates to the cost, will definitely change. And that's not to say that smaller systems need less or need more. But you're right. There's no point paying more to maintain a system than what it's saving you. So there is an element of practicality versus doing nothing versus doing too much. And so we would say definitely our scopes and frequencies would change for residential systems, where we would recommend to do it every 3rd, 4th, 5th year potentially, versus commercial systems, which I would absolutely recommend to inspect every year. They're larger systems, more complex systems. They might have implications around LGC rebates or sustainability outcomes. So there's a lot more implications in many cases from a commercial perspective. In saying that, the scope of what we do, again, might change depending on the size of the system. But in the vast majority of cases, we would highly recommend for all systems to be monitored, whether it be by the owner or by someone like us, and then for commercial systems to be annually inspected. Absolutely. In terms of a specific ROI against that, it's very difficult to say. You can provide ROIs to say, well, if it's down for a day, that's how much you lose. Can I say, in the next 5 years, your system will be down by X days? Of course I can't. The main reason, one, is that I can't tell the future, and there's lots of things that impact wear and tear on the system. So, but also, if we alleviate an issue or if we mitigate an issue, how can you judge that? So we've done this because we've mitigated it becoming a larger issue. sure, we can provide all sorts of forecasts on that, but again, it goes back to the car analogy. If you understand why you need to insure a car, why you need to maintain a car, then you should understand why you should maintain an electricity producing asset. The main difference, and I'd say this, or the two main differences, and I'll say this to everyone, is one, for a solar installer, they're often saying that it doesn't need maintenance because they don't want to deal with it themselves. That's the first issue. And the second issue is that it's not front of mind. And so unless something happens or their electricity bill spikes, they just forget about it. And those are the two main differences in my opinion.
So my background is I worked at ABB inverters, dealing with inverters for 10 years. So we had our quality problems at times. So I've actually been on commercial roofs, ripping open inverters, changing parts out, those sorts of things. I assume the inverter is probably a top 2 cause of rectification of what you're doing out there. If you could ask inverter manufacturers for something, would you ask them to make them field repairable and that sort of thing? Because the idea of pull it out and put a new one in, from my experience, can be an insanely difficult job for a thing that can possibly weigh 60 kilos, 70 kilos plus.
Great question. And I'll say that the four biggest areas that we would deal with in maintenance would be communication, isolators, roof isolators, which aren't on existing systems, we're on all the old ones, cabling and inverters. Those would be obviously the four main factors. And it's such a good, I've never been asked that question, and to be honest, no inverter manufacturer has ever asked me that question either, which might say something. But and I know there's lots of things that people are learning, and ABB is an interesting case because they were like the forefront 10, 15 years ago. So they're on some of the oldest systems now, so that's it's quite an interesting place to be from their perspective. But certainly I would ask inverter manufacturers for a couple of things. One is to make it easy, and I won't get technical, but to make it easy to test the strings that come out of it. So some OEMs, and I won't mention names, but some manufacturers make it very difficult to test the different strings, and some manufacturers make it very easy to test the different strings. Some inverter brands make it easy to pull out the front cover so that you can thermally scan the inverters, and some inverters make it impossible. So you have to thermally scan them with the cover on, which makes it far less effective. Some inverters are 100 kilos and make it harder to move, and some inverters are 20 kilos. And so for us, it's about how do you make it easy to test, easy to scan, and easy to move if that needs to be replaced. And so that would be the biggest, and more than anything else is local support, both for owners and for technicians. So it's the case that a number of manufacturers, their support is overseas, and you're dealing with people that English is a second language, or time differences, which make it very challenging. And so when you're dealing with local support, it makes all the difference. So amongst everything I've mentioned, local support would be number one, but those different elements are really critical. But a lot of those come from design, and it comes from the top down. And so unfortunately, we are seeing those things become much better with newer designs, but we're now dealing with 20 years of systems where that doesn't exist. And so it just, in my opinion, took way too long when it comes to all that sort of stuff. But those are exactly the things we're seeing on new inverters around all the things that you're talking about. So absolutely couldn't agree more on those items.
How is the uptake of batteries affecting maintenance of solar systems now?
So residential batteries from the rebate has just been ginormous. The rebate had to have been increased from 3 billion to 7 billion because it was just being consumed. So the uptake of residential batteries has been exponential. Commercial batteries are increasing, but obviously not at that same scale. So batteries in its entirety are too new to make predictions around failure rates, although we know that they will, because that's the nature of all technology. We know that they will fail over time. But manufacturers are still compiling their maintenance scopes. as we speak. So they might have hundreds of thousands of batteries out there, but they still don't have a defined maintenance scope, and they still don't have a defined support structure as what we talked about with the inverters, because they just want to get it in. They just want to get it in and get it in and get it in. So I'm hoping that will change moving forward. But we do do a large amount of battery inspections, and those substandard, unsafe percentages are fairly similar, even with newly installed batteries. So that's been quite interesting. But failure rates over time will tell. But I've seen many pictures, and I know for a fact the failure rates are coming. And it's just making sure that the industry is ready. And unfortunately, I don't believe that it will be. A lot of the installers that have spent enormous amount of time and resources installing it simply don't have the capacity to manage and maintain and respond to the inquiries that they will be getting in 5 years' time, if those installers still exist. And so that's the next challenge for the industry, would be understanding and having the capabilities to manage the exponential growth of inquiries that will be coming in. But also, as systems start to wear and tear and reach end of life after 10 or 15 years, the next sort of realm is system replacements and system recycling. That's the next frontier, of which we are nowhere near where we need to be. So as what Joe mentioned, worked for ABB, many of those systems will be end of life now, if not coming up very shortly. And so it would be in the interests of the business or the owner to replace the system rather than to continually repair it, similar to a car. And now what happens to who's managing that removal and that reinstallation? Sure, the installers will say, cool, we want to do that. But now, are they equipped to maintain the system up until that point? Or what are they doing with the system components that they're removing? And at the moment, they're all going to the tip.
Right.
And recycling might be the case. That you might hear elements of recycling. Not only is the technology not where it needs to be now, and there needs to be an enormous amount of increased investment around recycling of panels, but recycling inverters just is nowhere near where it needs to be. And right. Even you're seeing, even now, what we're seeing is regional tips simply don't have the capacity to even take the panels and the inverters when it comes to this. Yeah. And so now you've got people from capital cities traveling all the way up to regional centres to pick up these components. And so there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done to manage that regional elements around system replacement, system recycling, or even the capacity of tips to even take it. Certain states do want, like Victoria, you now need to put it into certain recycling centres or tips as opposed to landfill. So, that's been, helpful. But now you need to, just like with the battery rebates, that's great. But now you need to support the capabilities to manage that and what happens at the end. So that will be certainly the next frontier, which I'm sure you guys will be seeing as well, monitoring the assets that you monitor, is what happens to these orphan systems from a maintenance perspective, and what happens to these systems when they reach end of life.
So I've got a couple of questions from our audience. The first question here is, how are you applying technology to the inspection and analysis process?
So that's a great question, because I say to people, at the end of the day, AI will not replace us. I feel like that's like a placard at a protest. AI will not replace us. But, I don't see them replacing electricians and plumbers anytime soon. What that also means is that it means we need to structure AI into very specific sectors, because we're not using AI to do the work for us. But there's certainly elements around, whether it be tech or AI, but even tech and automation, which is not AI. So that would be around data capture and how they're capturing the data on site, what happens to those findings, so making sure it gets into the right hands to be able to review those, automating those findings into quotes, into jobs, and then delivering that to customers. So what's been the case is that our customers might have access to remote monitoring, or they might engage companies to inspect their systems. Now all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of faults and a whole bunch of issues, and the asset owner will be like, great, brilliant, what do I do with fault code 106? Or even if it is explained, what do I do with it? So it's about having the technology to, first of all, analyze faults that come in and to explain those into English, and to explain them in a coherent manner that asset owners understand what the issue is and what needs to be done, and whether something needs to be done or not, whether it's financially viable to do something, and to transform those findings into actions, and to have a partner or a team who are able to manage those. And those are really two sides of the same coin, but rather than just having faults that become a pain in the bum for people, you want to use technology to be able to identify the faults, whether it be inspections or active monitoring, and then use technology as well as process to interpret and action those faults, and to guide the customer into how they can resolve those. And I think those are two real key elements that we've managed to use technology to try and automate, structure a process around, and guide the customer through that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then I've got another question. Do any insurance underwriters that are lowering building insurance for regularly inspected solar based on safety? So I guess that question is around...
Sorry, Emilia, can you just repeat that? I think my internet...
Yeah. Any insurance underwriters that are lowering building insurance for regularly inspected solar? Are we seeing that at all?
Wow.
Yeah.
Who asked this question? This is a great one. The answer is not many. Not many.
Yeah.
So we've obviously, insurers have their partners who they can utilize to fix issues, but do they have the smarts in their premiums to impact those based on whether a system is inspected or not? Nope. And it blows my mind. Why would an insurer not provide incentives or punishments to people who are not maintaining their assets that they will be liable to replace when there's an issue? It makes no sense, and this very particular point hits a nerve, so apologies, I'm getting extra passionate about this, but it's really symptomatic of so many things in the industry that could be done so easily to ensure that the systems do what it does. And I feel like we're only a few incidents away from the solar industry being at the behest of very far right politicians who want to reinstate coal and gas and all that sort of stuff, and they need fuel for that fire, and we're only a few incidents away from that being the case. And so I think if insurers can support that, as well as the industry themselves, and maintenance providers and organizations like yourselves to really support that, the less fuel we give to those types of people, because the more consistency we can say that these will have. Batteries, wind, renewables and solar, the more that those become consistent, the more credence we can give to those being sustainable and the building blocks of the energy industry around Australia. And so that's what I believe what should be the case. But in short, not from what I'm seeing in the insurance sector.
Okay, interesting. Rohan or Joey, do you have any other questions? I do have more questions, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to jump in with any thoughts or questions before I ask a few more questions.
You talked a bit about recycling. I mean, when there's a balance there, because recycling older systems brings about issues of maintenance and managing older systems if you just put them back in the same place. So, I mean, is there a way that you envisage utilising a recycling process and reusing parts that perhaps pushes them into lower risk installations or some other process? I mean, how do you envisage best using recycling? Really?
So you cut out a bit there because maybe it's internet coverage, but I'll answer the first bit where it covered, which is around there is a balance between when you continue to service an asset versus when you need to remove it. So that is absolutely the case. There will be a case where it's not worthwhile to continue to fix an aging asset and it will be worth removing it. So that's the first element. from a recycling perspective, the problem here is that because of where the technology is at, often it's the case that asset owners need to pay the recycler to recycle their panels, as opposed to what many people might think is the recycler paying them to retrieve recycled panels. And that's absolutely not the case. Now, I'm not against recycling, of course I'm not, but it's around getting it to a place where private industry is also incentivized to recycle their panels. Because if we go to one of our systems, call it 100 kilowatts, and let's say if it's 300, 400 panels, and we say it will cost them thousands of dollars to recycle it, they will say, unless they're a very early adopter or very climate focused, they'll say no, please take it to the tip. And in fact, I was dealing with a finance company that finances solar systems, and one of their asset owners or clients weren't paying their system, and they wanted to threat to remove the system, and they wanted to understand what they could do. Could they reuse the system that they wanted to remove? And the answer is not really. You can't reuse the cables, you can't reuse the mounts. So those, that can be recycled because they're sort of metal, but you can't really recycle the inverters. And if the inverters are 5-6 years old, and they might be past their warranties, that's going to be a challenge to try and reinstall. And from a panel perspective, again, that is possible, but it has its risk around reinstalling them, around journey, and what impact that will have around the logistics and that happens on the panels themselves, and the costs to ship 400 heavy panels from one place to another. So it's not so practical. And so for me, it's around, I definitely think we'll get there, but investment needs to be made into that area of the sector, which is only going to be exponentially increasing. And I think in my opinion, certain areas of the industry, like, for example, rebates towards apartment level solar, I think that is great, but I think the industry will be far better suited, and there's far greater impacts to using that money to enhance the recyclability of our components, of which there'll be millions and millions and millions of panels over the next 1 to 2 decades.
Yeah, great points. Really great points. Joey, do you have any comments or questions? I've got a couple of questions, but I want to give you an opportunity. I'll ask this question.
Honey.
People install VER solar because it's perceived to be cost effective. It either makes or saves the money in their goals. With the warranty process not capturing the real cost of replacement, how would you design a system that incorporated systematized replacement as part of the model cost of ownership of these systems?
So what your installer should be doing is presenting you with a cash flow, and that cash flow should include maintenance. And I've seen cash flows, and not many of them do. But part of that cash flow, not only in my opinion, of course, there should be annual inspections, but should be component replacements. And so that component replacement should be at the end of specific warranty periods. And the biggest component would be inverters. But that cost should also include, so you might replace those panels after, call it the inverters after 10 years, but there should be a item on the components, in my opinion, call it every 4 to 5 years of replacing the inverters, and the labor components associated with that. Because people, and that is not happening, and people think, as I said, that because the inverters are warranted, the labor's warranted, and that's not the case. And you're also still paying for the investigation to understand and to create the case, to do all the necessary testing to get to that point. So that is certainly not covered either. So that absolutely should be covered in the cash flows as part of a particular system as well. And we can work with people to provide predictions. So there's a difference around providing a prediction or an opinion around what maintenance costs you should predict versus what the ROI is on that. Those are two very different things, but I 100% think that you should be putting in a maintenance cost every year, or at least asking your installer to be putting a maintenance cost every year to reflect more true ROI, and that would include labor costs and material costs. So 100%. And right now, all I'm seeing is inverter replacement costs in year 11. That's all I'm seeing. And by the way, to touch back on what we talked about, that would also include, people might think that our panels are warranted for 20 years, and so they won't put in a replacement panel costs. But as we've discussed, that absolutely is not the case. As panels become obsolete after 3 years, they might replace the panel, but that panel can't be installed because you can't replace an older panel with a newer panel. And so there will be costs associated with replacing potentially an entire string, or costs purely by removing the broken panel and bypassing it. So that absolutely should be taken into account when you're doing your cash flows.
Yeah, right. Got another question around any comparison on panels between Chinese equipment and European. Are you seeing a difference in maintainability between the Chinese equipment and European equipment?
So generally there's a tiered system. So a tier 1 system which relates to the financial backing or the bankability of a particular manufacturer, as well as their support and other elements around quality. And those are very public. So whether it be China or Europe, a tier 1 product really should be chosen. And then you should be understanding, do they have local support, as I discussed around the inverter side of things? Those would be sort of the two main factors. But in terms of the panel obsolescence, that exists regardless of manufacturer that you are dealing with. Technology is increasing. In fact, it doesn't matter because all of those manufacturers are competing with one another to try and get the leg up with the technology and how efficient, or the efficiency gains of particular panels. And so regardless of what manufacturer, aside from that tier 1 element, and there could be Trina, Canadian Solar, ICO, LG, whatever it might be, those are all very reputable companies. What you do need to pay attention to is what we talked about, regardless of manufacturer, is the design process, and making sure that you are purchasing at least 5% of spare panels, which is our recommendation when you are installing the system, such that if something happens with the panel, you can easily replace it. And that is literally the difference between a 2-hour job and a multi-day job, or whether you need to procure replacement materials or whether you don't. So that would be by far my response and recommendation, that if you're considering whether it be a residential or a commercial system, if it's all tier 1, that's great, but highly recommend buying some replacement panels.
Yeah, great. Awesome. In terms of maintenance, moving forward, you talked about water ingress and other forms of problems. It goes beyond just the damage to the electricals. You've got roofing and ceiling damage and all of those property damage too that goes along with that. Have you seen that can be very expensive, speaking from experience?
The expensive part of that is the solar itself. If it's installed properly, it doesn't damage the roof. You either are not penetrating the roof, or you're using existing penetrations. But it does make, for example, if there is a roof leak, or if you do need to re-roof a particular facility, as what you would need to do over a particular period of time, you do need to remove the system, and that is a costly process. And so that also should be considered in your cash flows, that if you think your system, your facility will need to be re-roofed in 10 years, you should focus on that. But again, that's where having a solar partner, again, like us or anyone else, becomes really valuable for a customer, because they know that they can call on us whether they want their system inspected, actively monitored, cleaned, sure, that's the one thing, or whether they want to re-roof and they want a partner to remove a system and reinstall it. We do a lot of those. Or even if they are installing air conditioning and they need to install it here, and so they need to move even 2 or 3 panels from here to here, that can be really frustrating to organize if you don't have a partner that can support that process for them. And so having a solar partner, again, their installer or anyone else, or like us, Industrias, I guess the advantage to us is we're national, so we can support national portfolios, but that certainly doesn't mean we don't support single assets as well. That's where it becomes really, really important. So that impacts that element. But you're right, that can be really expensive, and there's no alternative, and so that should be considered in cash flows as well.
Yeah, great. And one last thing, just this isn't really a maintenance issue, but it's more operational. So the newer panels are obviously much more efficient for the space they same space that we had from 10 years ago or 5 years ago even would take. So are you seeing people, if they want to increase their solar production, are you seeing people augment their existing solar, if say it's 5 years old, or are you seeing them replace it because they're saying that space to energy production ratio is more important?
Well, it does depend. So if their existing system is, let's say, 5 years old, and they've got spare space on the roof, then absolutely they should be adding to that system if they've got the consumption on site to do so. And you're right, what used to be 400 panels for 100 kilowatts is now 200 panels or less. So the whilst each panel is a little bigger, overall the footprint is far less. So 100% they should be considering that if there's space on the roof. If the system is very old and is in time for replacement, as we talked about before, then they absolutely, again, consumption dependent, they could be considering removing 100 kilowatts and replacing it with 200 kilowatts with the same footprint. So that's absolutely something that can be done.
Right,
Plus,
right.
they should be considering retrofitting batteries. That's something that a lot of companies are doing at the moment. So I would definitely recommend, and you guys would be seeing that as well, I definitely would be recommending companies consider retrofitting batteries to their existing systems to really ramp up the savings and the ROI that they're getting from their existing infrastructure. There's an enormous amount of great tools and technologies and devices like you guys have, which can augment and control that level of load, which really goes through the roof once there's batteries installed. And so I think people absolutely should be considering retrofitting batteries on existing systems.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. I've sort of taken over. Joey or Rohan, do you guys have any questions or comments?
It's probably a good kind of wrap-up type of question, but as an OEM provider, what do you wish that installers handed over as part of the commissioning process? If you had your ideal commissioning process handing over, you were engaged immediately after that as an
Yes.
O&M and maintenance provider.
So aside from the design, engage us or understand the maintenance implications before they commission. But after the commission process would, as we discussed, documentation for sure, and just to have an honest conversation. So documentation, make sure that the monitoring, the inverter monitoring is commissioned for their customer to look at their level, at their discretion, I should say. It is amazing how many owners of very large systems don't have login details to a monitoring system that already exists. So monitoring, documentation, and to have an honest conversation with customers around the importance of maintenance. Often that's not happening because they think that they'll have to deal with it, or they think that it might be a negative reflection on their system if they talk about maintenance. And I think the contrary is the case. I think installers can build up such trust with their customers, being honest about how the system will perform and the maintenance that's required of it. So I think really three things for me is documentation, a clear handover of the monitoring, and an honest conversation about the importance of maintenance, whether they use us or anyone else. I think that's really critical. That's a great question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Well, this has been a really, really insightful conversation. The massive takeaway is that maintenance on solar is real. So design it with maintenance in mind. Do maintenance over the life of it to extend the life and safety of it. And you have partners like Industrias and Daniel who can definitely help out in that. It's been really, really enjoyable conversation. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for stepping out of the conference to talk with us.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And I think just more people need to have conversations like these. So I really, really appreciate you having me on. And having the time and dedicating an episode of the podcast to O&M. I think it's just so important. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to have you on again. And thank you, Joey and Rohan, for joining the panel, for great questions and insights from both of you. And everyone have a great day. Enjoy the conference, and we'll be back in a month with another topic. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.